Welcome to Good Faith Reads. I'm your host, Cliff Vaughn, media producer at Good Faith Media. Good Faith Reads is a conversation with our book authors at Good Faith Media. We've published a considerable library of titles under our Nurturing Faith book imprint, and we invite you to check them out at goodfaithmedia.org/shop. Today's guests are Rabbi Mark Schiftan and Dr. Frank Boehm, authors of A Rabbi and a Doctor Walk into a Bar, a shared dialogue on faith and belief. The three of us are sitting down together in person here in Nashville. Rabbi Schiftan, Dr. Boehm, welcome to the podcast.
This is a first for us, so we're looking forward to it.
Let's start with you, Rabbi. Wonder recurs throughout the book, and I'd like to hear you talk about wonder, about God, about life, about the universe, both in your experience and in Judaism.
I'm really glad that you noticed that in the book. I think Frank and I, Dr. Boehm and I, are both very grateful people for the gifts of every day. And in our tradition, in Jewish tradition, the custom is to find 100 reasons, formal reasons, to offer a formal blessing during the course of each day. And that may vary from things like a beautiful sunrise to the gift of sight once again, the opportunities of each day, or of meaningful work. I think that's the lens that Judaism places on valuing our time on this earth, and that it leads with a sense of gratitude for all the blessings that can easily be overlooked.
Well, another layer for me is being an obstetrician. I delivered a lot of babies, and every time I delivered a child, I looked at it with wonder, in the sense that I considered that child that I held in my arms before I passed it to the parents was a miracle. And knowing a little bit about genetics, it was a wonder to me that we all start off with a sperm and an egg to make one cell, and that cell divides and divides and further divides into all these different organs, and 40 weeks later, or 9 months later, out comes this child that has 86 trillion neurons in it, 36 trillion cells in its body, and 36 billion cells in its brain. And here we have it. It's just a miracle. It's a wonder, and it made every delivery a real joy for me.
Let's talk about, you mentioned gratitude, Rabbi, and one of the things that I noted in the book was your talk about the commandment, thou shalt not covet. And y'all actually had an interesting back and forth about, you could just flip that commandment, if you will, and say this is really about just being grateful for what you have. So you brought up gratitude in the context of wonder. Let's talk a little bit more about gratitude, and you can talk a little bit about the 10 Commandments or covetousness, but bring that into the conversation, if you would, Rabbi, and then Doctor.
I'm happy to do exactly that. You know, I think we tend to view our world, all of us, it's a human failing, by what we do not have, and what those who we see around us may have that appears to be greater than us, grander than us, that they're more successful somehow. And I think in our age of social media, that's been accelerated and exacerbated because everyone curates every birthday, every night out. People take photos of their plates of food, what they're eating, the vacations they're having. And if you look at that, it would be very easy to be green with envy. And I think this idea of coveting, there's a reason why it's there as one of the top 10, so to speak. And the ancient rabbis asked a lot of questions of themselves, and they gave the answers to those questions. One question they raised is, who is rich? And the answer they gave is the one who is happy with his or her lot. And I think that is part of it's part of the challenge of everyday living and living a normal life, that there will always be people with more than you. There will always be people who you might see as having better opportunities or a better life. And those are all real feelings. But too often we don't look in the other direction. And that is to say, how gifted, how grateful am I with exactly what I have because I know how many others are far worse off or have to do without or have had difficulty that I haven't had to have to deal with. So I think this idea of coveting, the response to that is stop for a minute, humble yourself, and be grateful. And that goes a long way to the whole concept of what's at the heart of religion, really any religion, but certainly in Jewish tradition.
I echo what Mark just said. For me, the commandment would have been better written, thou shalt be grateful. And I think I say that in the book. Coveting is certainly something we should avoid, but I'm more of a positive person. There's so many do nots in the Ten Commandments. I thought this 10th one should be thou shalt be grateful, because once you covet, you really are wishing to have something or to be something that you're not or you don't have. And I think we should be very happy. I come from a very humble background. My parents were lower middle class, I think the best way to put it. And I never felt poor. I always felt grateful. I had love. I had food on the table. I had an education. And I've been grateful my whole life, no matter what I had. And I think that that's a more positive response to the 10th commandment rather than thou shalt not want somebody else's something.
I shared with y'all off mic that in the context of gratefulness that I thought my mother excelled at being grateful, that she was very present. I remember she lived in Germany in 1959 and 60 when my dad was drafted in the Army and was sent to Germany as part of the post-war occupation forces, and she went with him. My brother was born there. She would say her whole life, I was happy then, living in the little village with my dad, giving birth to my brother. I was happy then, and I knew it then. And she would remember some friends that she said only when they were 75 would they would look back and say, I was happy then. In other words, I think she was telling me, you've got to be grateful and you've got to notice it. I think I've got that part of my mother in me, in that I hope I'm grateful. I feel that I'm grateful. I feel that I can see most things for which I am to be grateful. My question for you, Doctor, is you write about God and our DNA quite a few times in the book. And I'm wondering, is my gratitude, to the extent that I have it, is that genetic? Was it cultivated by my mother? I know we can go off into the nurture-nature debate, but given your comments about God and our DNA, I'm really interested to hear more about how gratitude is passed along to us.
I thought you'd never ask that question. I have a little different take on the subject of God, perhaps, than people I've spoken to. But I've come to the conclusion that there are two basic theories of God. There's the poof theory, which I write about, which is in the first part of Genesis, where God says, let there be man, let there be land, let there be a sky, let there be water. That's the poof theory. The other theory is the evolutionary theory, that billions of years ago, the first cell came to being, and that cell divided, as we talked about many times, and eventually became all of us and all of life as we know it. And that's the one that I believe in. And part of that is obviously DNA. And that DNA that God produced, that entire process to me is more of a magnanimous thing, a more powerful thing, a more awesome thing than just saying poof. So the formless divine energy that I started to believe in was this energy that created me through the process of genetics, and in particular DNA. And my brain, for example, I mentioned, has 86 billion neurons in it. To me, that's God. God made that. That's where the conscience rises. It speaks to me in that still small voice that we talk about in the book. And a lot of other people have come to that conclusion, but for me, it was a way to answer the question, because back when I was 27 years old, I had a patient who was having problems with her pregnancy, said, Dr. Boehm, will you pray with me? And I said, sure, I'll be glad to. And then she said, do you believe in God, doctor? And I said, yes. But as I was leaving the room after we prayed, I thought, I think I'm a little disingenuous. I'm not sure how I believe. And so I started to think about that. And the God that eventually appeared before me, so to speak, was this awesome energy that created this incredible universe. I mean, we live in one galaxy, the Milky Way. There are 2 trillion observable galaxies, 2 trillion. And who knows how many that are not observable are out there. And if you take a look at just our little galaxy, if you take the speed of light being 186,000 miles per second, it takes 100,000 years for that light to go from one end of the galaxy to the other. So the enormity of it was just, to me, awesome. And it just couldn't have just started de novo. So I started to believe in that God, and that morphed into the DNA that invaded my brain, spoke to me with a still small voice. That's who I pray to, and I think that's been my way of answering the question that Einstein once, or the statement that Einstein said, is that science without religion is lame, and religion without science is just non-existent. So those kind of things help me as a scientist, as a person of medicine, to explain who God was and how God interacted with me.
What Dr. Boehm is saying is wonderful for him. It's I'm not so concerned about all of the billions of galaxies. I'm concerned about this world, this life, and I think the part that we agree on is that there is a sheer miraculousness. I think I quote a line in the book that the architect of the universe doesn't design a staircase leading to nowhere, that this is all so finely and intricately ordered and organized, and we are at the crowning glory of all of what has been created. That is, humanity is at the crowning glory. I think to your question about what's infused in you from your mother, I think there's both nurture and nature that takes place inside all of us. And some things we can know about, some things are beyond our reach. But I think that gift that your mom gave you is a lifelong gift, because what that keeps at bay is hopelessness, meaninglessness, purposelessness. The gift she gave you is to seize the goodness in each day and in each relationship with other human beings. I think that's a priceless gift she gave you, and it's a priceless gift our Creator gives to all of us if we frame our lives that way. This issue of gratitude is so important to me. It's a big deal to me. And but it's not just gratitude expressed for the gifts of our lives. It's also the gratitude that we express actively, constantly, to others who surround our lives. Too often, we keep that gratitude in our own heads for what we've been given, and we don't tell the people around us what they give to us, how much they mean to us, how their contributions shape us and mold us. I think that's the other face of that gratitude, and it sounds to me that one of the things at this station in life that you are acutely aware of is the blessing that your mother's gift of gratitude was, infusing it in her life and in your life.
The extent to which I can pass on gratitude to my kids, that parallels the extent to which, quote unquote, God is living on in me or in my kids.
In Jewish tradition, we say after someone has passed on, may their memory be a blessing. It's a funny thing, because here at my time doing work at Belmont, I now know that some of my Christian colleagues have taken on that same phrase when they mention someone. And I think the idea of that is that there is a sense of our eternity that is embedded in the minds of others when they think of us as a blessing. I often use this phrase, the heaven of the human heart. And I know for many Christians and for many Jews, there is a strong belief and a strong hope in a very tangible afterlife, a heaven, a gathering place where they hope to be. And I wish that I had that ironclad belief in such a place. I don't. My heaven is in how my time on earth infuses goodness into the lives of others. And that is most acutely expressed and I hope felt by those closest surrounding my life. And my hope is that every time they think of something, a memory, a teaching, a lesson that I've inspired within them, that's my eternity. Whether that's long-lived or short-lived, I don't know. But that for me is at the centerpiece of what I take comfort in as a measure of eternity, that I can know of and I can try and instill and infuse in those who come after me.
Doctor, thoughts on how God lives on through our relationships?
Well, I think the rabbi expresses it how I believe as well. And that is the good that I do here, the memories that I leave, along with my DNA, can live on forever, basically. I'm sitting here talking to you, but in part it's because of great-great-great-great-grandparents that have passed on their teaching to their children, their DNA, to the next generation who eventually passed it on to me. So we live in each other's lives by the things that we're taught and that we're given. And that's a very comforting feeling for me, that what I leave behind, the things I taught my kids, the nurturing that my kids got from me, and my grandkids, and the people that I took care of, that will live on in ways that sometimes won't even come up with my name. That will be something that's unknown, but it will be a life after death. It's not a physical life. It's a sort of a genetic kind of life, a nurturing kind of life after death.
Let me see if I can articulate my next question to try to connect what we've just been talking about to Stolpersteine, which you mentioned in the book. Stumbling stones that are in front of homes of Jewish residents who were taken and sent to concentration camps during and before World War II. So you mentioned Stolpersteine in the book, and I was in Germany in June, and I had seen these with my siblings as we were moving across Germany. My question is, for people for whom it may seem like there has been a broken, there's been a severing of their ability to pass. I'm not saying there has been, but it may seem like people who were taken from us too early, or people for whom they never had much of a chance anywhere on planet Earth, and what chance did they have to pass on a relationship so that God can be passed from them to others? Is there something that can happen when any of us sees a stumbling stone or takes a moment to remember someone that we never knew? Is that a way in which we can rescue or reclaim? I guess I want to talk about memory and how we do that, because you brought up, and even in the book you mentioned we die twice, our death, and then the last person who knew us dies, and maybe you could say there's a third and a fourth and a fifth death as it kind of keeps passing on. But let's talk about memory, and let's start with you, Rabbi.
Yeah, I think you raise a very interesting question, and as a pulpit rabbi, we read at the end of each service the list of names of those who passed at that season before we recite a prayer, a mourner's prayer, a mourner's Kaddish. The prayer, interestingly enough, never mentions death. It speaks of the gift of life. But when I first began in my 20s as a rabbi, every congregation has these names. And so you spend a lot of time on getting the pronunciation right of the names, making sure you don't stumble upon them, because there are survivors for whom the mention of that name has great meaning and should have great meaning. But honestly, in these congregations that have been around for 100, 150 years, the length of the list is quite long. In my younger years, I would find myself questioning, do we really need to read all these names? Half the people on this list have no surviving family members in this city or congregation. Wouldn't it be easier to just keep the list current of those who want names to be read and they happen to be in the congregation at that service? That's the arrogance of youth. In my case, youth in the ministry, in the rabbinate. As I went through the decades, I realized in that kind of moment of quite honest reflection, you know what, someday it's going to be my name on that list. And how am I going to feel when some younger rabbi says, well, there's nobody here anymore who knows who this person is. We don't need to read this name anymore. The point being, to what you had just mentioned, I think every time we acknowledge a person's worth, that their life mattered, however long or short it was, we somehow preserve their measure of eternity in the world in which we live. Every time you stop to look at those stones, those markers of someone whose life was ended too soon, you acknowledge their worth and dignity as a human being. I think there is no greater honor you can give to our Creator than to do that. Similarly, with reading these names on the Kaddish list, every time we read those names, they may be long gone, but we acknowledge that their life mattered somehow in our community, in the world in which we travel.
Follow-up, is there any sense at all for either of you in which saying someone's name, does it trigger something in universal energy to actually say someone's name aloud in either of your opinions? Or it's more about, I'm giving voice to their name, and this is about me and what is happening to me? And maybe those aren't mutually exclusive.
Well, when my father's name is read at his anniversary of his death, I picture that voice that utters that word, those words, Ludwig Boehm, to reverberate around the room, bouncing off the walls. There's a life to it for me. And so for me, it's almost a physical thing that brings me such great comfort and joy, because I was very close with my dad. And to know that his name was being bounced around the room made me feel good. Consequently, I also realized that there'll be times when nobody will remember Ludwig Boehm's name, and yet it will still bounce around the room. There will be life to that. My name eventually will be joined in that room. And that's sort of what we wrote about, that which you mentioned, that some people think we die twice, once when we die and the second time when the last person who knows us dies. And I don't take that as something that I believe in, because I believe in, even after everybody is gone, that name, that life has meaning. And whether you know the person's name or anything about them, they live on in other people and in a way that we may not understand but brings comfort. So when I listen to all the names that when the rabbi mentions them at the services, maybe out of the 40 names I'll know 10. But even the ones that I don't know, I think about them. I think about the words that make up their name. And that is what's making up their life at that moment. So to me, it brings comfort, and I think it's a wonderful Jewish tradition.
First of all, and I will give credit to Dr. Boehm for forcing me grudgingly to be as enamored with the DNA concept as he clearly is. I think one of the amazing things that we know about the patterns of DNA is that they are within our genetic line 10, 20 generations and more down the road. So, for instance, I may never have known my great-great-grandfather on either side of my family, but they're there. They continue to live on within me as they do within all of us. There's something profoundly comforting about that and meaningful about that. The other thing I wanted to say is I like to think, it's not my thought alone, but I like to think when you look out at the congregation and there are some empty seats in the congregation, that those seats at the moment you're reading those names, this is speaking very poetically, metaphorically, that somehow those seats become occupied by those who once took those places before us. That too, that sense of the timelessness of a community is very powerful to me. Those memories, they come alive in that way.
We'll be right back with more Good Faith Reads.
Do you have a book idea, outline, or manuscript? Good Faith Media is always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. We publish in print and digital and help promote your work through the many resources of Good Faith Media. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head over to goodfaithmedia.org to get started. That's goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Reads. Today I'm joined by Rabbi Mark Schiftan and Dr. Frank Boehm, authors of A Rabbi and a Doctor Walk into a Bar, a shared dialogue on faith and belief. Could y'all tell us a little bit about your writing process? How did you write the book? Did you set weekly goals, have word count mandates? Did you record yourselves talking and then transcribe it? Did you write a little bit and email it to the other? Let's start with you, Rabbi, and then we'll talk to the doctor. Writing process.
In some ways, what we did is based on an ancient Jewish learning technique model called pilpul. That is the back and forth dialogue and the hope that in a passionate, civil dialogue, debate, and discourse, there are some truths that emerge and continually are challenged and refined. And so the way it would work is one of us would start off on a topic. We never knew exactly where that was going to go. And then with great delight, I have to say, the other of us would be thrilled to get that first paragraph and respond to it, oftentimes immediately, but certainly vigorously and passionately. And when the whole thing was done, the first draft, we would sit down and read it out loud in our own voices to one another, see what made sense, see what didn't, see what should be clarified or amplified, and we worked very hard then to come up with the final integrated piece.
Yeah, we would take walks every Monday, starting when Rabbi retired. And on the walks, we started talking about these issues, and it was a back and forth. And we found out that we shared so much in common. We're both only children. We were both raised by Germans. We both spoke the language. We both ate nothing but German food. We decided to go to Berlin together, and we spent a week there, which is outlined in the book by an article in the Observer. And from that, we said, let's expand this and start writing a column. The title of the article in the Observer was "A Rabbi and a Doctor Walk into Berlin." So we used that then to say a rabbi and a doctor walk into a bar, and we started to take a topic and go back and forth, and finally that wound up on paper. So I would come up with a topic, let's say belief in God. I would put my first paragraph in and say, well, Rabbi, what do you think? Then he would email me back his response, and I would email him back, and eventually the article was written. So it was very spontaneous, and it wasn't a lot of editing. We both have done a fair amount of writing, Mark with all of the sermons he's written and me with my newspaper columns. So we really had a lot of fun doing it, and we challenged each other. And the process was a good one, and as a matter of fact, we're still doing it, and hopefully we'll come up with a second edition.
Two things. One, what do I have to do to get invited to your Monday walks so I can be part of the process? And two, one of the regrets I have, it's not a regret, it's a regret and a bemoaning that in my Christian tradition, I do not feel it encouraged back and forth. It was really about dogma, and at least as I experienced it in its formal institutions. So an appreciation of the back and forth, I got that out of higher education. I came to that in some other ways, but it did not happen out of my inherited religious tradition, which I think is too bad. So it's one of the things I love about the book and about Judaism in general, as I understand it, is an appreciation of the back and forth and disagreements among friends. Do you have any tips of how one can say, we can share this religious tradition, but I'm going to tell you what I believe, and it may really be, in some cases, drastically different from what you believe. I guess I'm looking for some sort of salve as someone who comes from Christianity to say there's more than one way to look at something.
I really appreciate the question because you've hit on one of the primary purposes that led us to write all these essays, which led to, in culmination with the book, the Jewish people, our Hebrew name is Yisrael. It goes back to the story of Jacob. And Yisrael literally means one who wrestles with God. It's an unusual name to give a religious people, but it tells you about what is sacred in our tradition, versus what is viewed as sacrilegious. That is to say, in Jewish tradition, it is sacred to question and to challenge and to re-examine and reinterpret. It is far removed from that which would be considered sacrilegious or profane. And I think part of our journey here in writing these columns was to say both to the Jewish community of which we are a part, but to the Christian community as well, that you can actually strengthen your faith, your relationship to God, and therefore your relationship to your religious community by asking those questions that normal human beings would want to ask about the imperfections and the challenges of living a life. That by doing that, you're actually trying to connect yourself to something higher and greater than yourself. You are not in any way diminishing or devaluing the faith tradition you come from or your relationship with your Creator. In fact, if there is a God in heaven, that's a whole other topic, then we believe God wants that kind of active engagement, that wrestling. And if you remember the end of that story of Jacob's dream, Jacob says to this angel with whom he wrestles, I will not let you go until you bless me. And that's the other part of this, is that when you engage in that honest dialogue, that wrestling, you're actually creating the pathway for a blessing for your life. Your life has become more sacred in the process of questioning and showing some sacred skepticism in belief and theology.
Good Faith had said something to us about the fact that they had not published a book with Jewish content before, or at least not in the last 5-10 years. And we were interested in having Good Faith Media publish our book so that Christians would read it as well. Because you know what they say, once you know somebody, you have a relationship with someone, you tend to understand them better. They're not strangers. And once you read this book, you'll get a lot of how Jews think, how a rabbi thinks, how a Jewish doctor thinks. And even though we may have different ideas of where God is and how God interacts with us, we present a point of view that is definitely Jewish. And I think that if you read the book and you understand more about Judaism, the relationship will improve. And in this era of rising incidences of anti-Semitism, and it's only going to get worse, we think this is an important message to the Christian community, not just the Jewish community. So our intent in writing this book had several intentions, and that was certainly one of them.
Thank you for writing the book and letting Good Faith Media publish it. Thank you for this conversation today. I have a few more questions. You brought up, Dr., rising anti-Semitism. And in the book, you talk about Jew hatred. And I'd like to ask you to comment on why that is. I think you said that is your preferred term, or you think it's more accurate, or at least opens up a conversation when we talk about the names. So talk about Jew hatred.
Well, a Semite is someone who speaks the Arab language, or the Semitic language, rather. And there are other sects and people that speak that. So being anti-Semitic is not necessarily being anti-Jewish. And I look at this anti-Semitism that we're calling this more as Jew hatred. And it's been around, it's the oldest hatred there is. It started long before Jesus was born. And we've lived with it throughout all the ages, and the pogroms and the Holocaust and the Greeks and the Romans. We've survived all this and to this very day. So that Jew hatred will always be there. And lately, because of perhaps October 7th and a few other issues, it seems to be gathering momentum. And we think this is a good time to tell people who we are as a people, to get to know us, and therefore perhaps not hate us, to understand us. I mean, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand. Jews have this saying, you get two Jewish people together, you get three opinions, not two opinions. And I think that what Mark and I have done over our walks is to talk about these differences of opinion with a respect for each other. And at the end in the epilogue, we make the point that everybody should have a friend that they take a walk with and talk about issues, not just of the day and is their refrigerator working properly or not, but talking about important subjects. Even when you disagree politically or religiously, if you can disagree but not be disagreeable, you learn to understand what another person feels and thinks about, and you can actually appreciate them. There's some people that I disagree with vehemently, but I like them. I care about them. I actually feel for them, and I enjoy talking to them. So it's a process, but it's a healthy one.
Rabbi, would you like to comment on Jew hatred or anti-Semitism?
Let me start by saying a couple of very positive things that I think in many circles in American religious life, the relationship between the Jewish community and the Christian community has never been stronger or better. I think that we can't ignore centuries of church-mandated Christian anti-Semitism. Europe is replete with those memories and histories. But I think there is a real openness among many Christian communities here to realize that Jesus was born a Jew, lived proudly as a Jew, and died as a Jew. And therefore, the more that Christians can understand about the underpinnings of Jesus' life and of their own faith's origins, it can make them stronger in their own Christian faith. So there is a real renaissance, may even be more than a renaissance, a new beginning of Christians trying to understand the roots, the Jewish roots of their faith. I think that's one of the things they will find in reading this book. I think since the events of October 7th, 2023, the terrorist attack against the state of Israel, there's always an excuse for a rise of anti-Semitism. That's been the history. It can be anything that becomes the hook to hang it on. And I think one of the things we have realized is while there may have always been anti-Semitic attitudes from those on the far right, we have been really shocked to find what has come from the far left. It's one of the reasons why many Jewish families are now looking to send their children to Christian colleges, because those are safe campuses for their Jewish children. They don't have to face some of what went on in some of the elite universities in this country. I think the term Jew hatred, Frank is really right on the insistence of that term, because anti-Semitism is almost sort of a diplomatic euphemism for what this really is, which is really an attempt to denigrate the Jewish presence and the Jewish spirit, and in some cases to be incendiary in terms of violence against Jewish institutions and Jewish individuals. And so the answer to your question is, we need all the friends that we can get. And at this time in history, many of our friends come from the Christian community in America. And in many ways, we wanted to alert them to what we're feeling now as Jews in America, with the object that they will stand up and stand by us, speak with us, and speak out for us when our communities are targeted and at risk.
I read with great interest your discussion and back and forth about whether you considered yourselves to be American Jews or Jewish Americans. And maybe we'll start with the doctor. Maybe you could rope the experience of your parents into your response and how your parents thought about Germany and Jews, and then talk a little bit about your own perceptions of being Jewish in America, and then we'll hear from the rabbi.
Well, it's an interesting dinner conversation that I've asked many people what they thought. My father and his family for generations all came from Germany, so he always felt himself to be a Jewish German. When Hitler came to power, he lost his citizenship. People stopped being friendly with him. His business dropped off. And he realized that he was not really considered a German anymore. And so when he came to America, he realized that he was more of a German Jew than he was a Jewish German. He identified more with being a Jew rather than being a German. And so it made me think about whether I was an American Jew or a Jewish American. I basically considered myself to be a Jewish American, sort of like my dad thinking himself as Jewish German. But with all the rise in Jew hatred and the anti-Zionism, and knowing that even though America seems a safer place, and it's been the safest place for Jews, Jewish people have never had anything like this until Israel came around. And to this day, I consider it a safe haven for Jews. Even though we seeing a rise in Jew hatred, I still think it's a relatively safe place to be. I also realize that this is early. This is just 2025. I don't know what 5, 10, 15, 20 years is going to be like. And it is possible, based on history, that someday the entire country will turn against the Jew. And that would make me an American Jew, not a Jewish American. We're playing with words, but it's a concept. Throughout history, the Jew has been kicked out of every country, has been vilified, destroyed, traumatized, killed, whatever you want to call it, throughout history. Israel is the first time in the history of humankind where the Jew has had a place to go to, had a nation to live in with peace. And of course, October 7 shattered that in many different ways. So we're in a safe place here in Nashville, I feel, and I think in many cities throughout the country. But I still worry about that because my father had no idea that this would ever happen. He was well integrated into the German society, and I think Mark's family was too. It was the furthest thing from their mind that someday they would have to leave Germany. My father had to talk my mother into leaving in 1938, 3 months before Crystal Night. He had vision, and I've always complimented him on that vision to leave and to save his life, because saving his life saved not only my life, but my children and grandchildren, and so that you have a whole slew of little Boehms because of his decision-making. So I worry a little bit about the future of America. Right now I'm reasonably pleased that we're handling things relatively well, but I'm worried. And so I decided to call myself an American Jew.
So to be precise, The difference is in these two expressions is one word is the adjective and one is the noun. And you put the emphasis on how you identify yourself as being the noun. So I think for many Jews in America, they have gone through this questioning in a way like never before over the past couple of years. Because of this rise in Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, I think that there are people who always thought themselves Americans first, with the Jewish as an adjective. They've had to do a little bit of reshuffling, at least momentarily or temporarily, because of the rise in anti-Semitism and Jew hatred over the last couple of years in this country, let alone around the rest of the world. I think what Christians have to try to appreciate is that we are a very often targeted religious minority. I think the FBI just released its latest figures on anti-Semitic incidents in 2024, was the highest on record, both towards institutions and individuals, threats and actual acts of violence and intimidation. So because of my past, because I came from parents who were forced to flee Europe and eventually take refuge in this country, I always put the emphasis on the Jewishness of who I am, that is my anchor. And frankly, it's in a way that many believing Christians place the anchor on being a Christian first, nationality or country of origin second. I always consider myself an American Jew as opposed to the adjective of a Jewish American. Not that everyone on the street asks you the question, but internally, I think many Jews are having to look at that a little bit differently now. Am I one and not the other? Am I a little bit of both? I will tell you this, and this really gives you a window. My parents, from the point I was very young, had a passport for me. When our children were born, all three of them, we immediately got them passports. Not because we were planning a trip abroad, but because as Jews, and as Jews who had fled in recent memory, we knew that you always want to have those on hand. I tell that to some people who have been in America for generations, members of the Jewish people, and they used to say, I don't understand that. Nothing, it can't happen here. And we hope it will never happen here. But we know that from the script, the playbook, that it can happen anywhere. So I think in that regard, there's a lot of redefinition of, in the end, who are we and what comes first. It's not a matter of loyalty or dual loyalty. It's a matter of to whom I belong the most, shall we say.
I finished that chapter or a couple of chapters in which you talked about Jew hatred and am I a Jewish American or American Jew? And these are my words, not yours. I won't tag y'all with this, but I was left thinking, well, maybe America really isn't that special after all. I don't know if you want to address this or not. I mean, you talked about it's early. It's 2025. It's also early in a country's history as well.
Well, I would echo what Dr. Boehm said. I think the Jewish experience, the Jewish enterprise, given the opportunities in this country, many of them granted from its inception, many of them hard fought and hard gained. This has been the golden age in Jewish life. It is unparalleled in the history of the Jewish people to have so many successive generations of tranquility and opportunity. And I think that the Jewish contributions to America in medicine, in science, in law and jurisprudence, in education, in enterprise and business life have been exemplary. But I think part and parcel with that is that the Jewish community has been profoundly grateful for the gifts of this land. We all came as immigrants. Most of our people came here between the 1880s and the 1920s, literally with nothing. And we're able here to make this truly a land of opportunity. So I think, as you have expressed, Cliff, it's a very hard time for us, but it's a very hard time for Americans. If we are most honest with ourselves and look in the mirror, I think we would say there is no better country in which to live. We are the exemplar of the world of so many freedoms and liberties, but those are always challenged. They are always at risk, and you cannot shrink back from one moment in maintaining the fight for human dignity, human decency, equality, and freedom.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that the rabbi just said. I think America's a fantastic country. There's never been anything like it in the history of humankind. We've been a democracy, a real democracy, for 250 years. And the Jew has been safe here. The Jewish people love America. I love America. And we are going through a rough patch at the moment, but I think we'll survive. I think that these kind of conversations we're having, these kind of books that have been written, I think eventually that hatred will subside. At least that's my hope. I'm going to live here in America. I'm not leaving to go to any other country like my father had to do. So I'm very proud of this country and what it's done. It started with George Washington in his letter to the Jews in Rhode Island. America will be good to you, quoting the Bible passages. You can feel safe in America. And that started with George Washington. And I think that's been true throughout history. We have something like 7 million Jews in this country, and we are a proud religion and very proud of our country.
Mark, on page 88 of the book, you said that we become less judgmental as we age. Let's just talk about being judgmental and aging.
I appreciate the question. I think that what happens is we live a life, and I think that we see much less of the world because of our personal life experiences and the lives of others, much less as clearly delineated between black and white, and we see incredibly greater amounts of gray matter, where it's not so easy to make judgments on other people because our lives are no longer, if ever, free of blemish or imperfection or failure or acts of misjudgment or lack of judgment. So I think, it's true that older people can become cranky or bitter, but I also think that we somehow become, in terms of the human experience, a little more understanding than perhaps we once were. We have this line in the memorial service on our holiest day of the year, the Day of Atonement. It's one of our older prayer books in English that we used for decades. And it speaks in this case about those who have passed on, but the line applies to what we're talking about right now. The line says, the quote, "We see them now with the eye of memory, their faults forgiven, their shortcomings lessened." And I think that's one of the things that delineates the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is what we accrue by observation and experience over the course of our lives. And if it's done right, we learn that no one is perfect, not us nor anyone else. We're much more comfortable in that zone of not passing judgment, or at least not quick and irreversible judgment of others.
I think you can sum up what the rabbi just said with that line about good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Some of the bad judgment that we've had is judging people, judging them too harshly. As we age, we realize that we did that, and so we soften our approach, and we understand the gray that Mark talks about. There's so much gray. And as we age, certainly as I've aged, I've become much more tolerant of people's other opinions. And I believe that's just because I've experienced so much and I've learned so much.
Let me add something else to this. I remember when I was in my 20s and 30s, I would have these conversations, probably monologues that I led with my mother of blessed memory. And I used to tell her about someone that usually had something that really bothered me about how they lived or the choices they made. And I remember she would always or often take their side. And she would say, well, have you ever considered this about this person or their upbringing or the reality they face? And I would get so angry with her, and I would say, look, you're my mother, not theirs. Can you just support and validate what I'm saying? Now I have 3 kids. They're all in their 30s. And they love to tell me about their friend or someone important in their lives. They want to complain at length about them, their shortcomings, the disappointments they've caused, the heartache. And I find myself saying, well, have you thought about it from their side? Have you thought about where they grew up or what they experienced? My kids get just as angry with me as I did with my mother because they're seeing it much more clearly as black and white. And I realized at that point, first of all, I realized how unfair I was to my mother then. But what I really realized is that this is a matter of perspective gained over the years and over the decades. You cannot possibly know in your 30s what you know in your 60s, 70s, or 80s. And when you're in the latter portions of your life, you have lived a life. You understand things are much more complicated and far less simple than you think they are when you are filled with the relative arrogance of youth.
An important note to all of our listeners, we at Good Faith Media are always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head on over to goodfaithmedia.org for more information. Last question, Rabbi and Doctor. If you were in dialogue with one of your readers, what's a particular question you would like to ask them? We'll start with the doctor.
The most difficult question that I had to answer in the book and in normal life was a question that has been asked universally. How does evil exist, or why does evil exist? How did we lose 6 million Jews in the Holocaust? Who would do these kinds of things? How does evil exist? And we have a chapter on that. And this was the question that I would ask the reader to look at, because I believe, in my own opinion, I've answered the question. And it's based a lot on some of the initial chapters on belief in God and the God that resides through my DNA within me. And that, plus the evolutionary process, I put all that together and explain why evil exists still. I don't believe it'll always exist, but for now, in this evolutionary process that we're living in, it exists, and I have an answer. The question I would ask the average reader is, read several of these chapters, and especially then get to why evil exists, and I think you may have at least one person's answer, and that would be a doctor.
I think the question that I would want to leave readers to consider and to challenge them with is, did this book open you up and draw you closer to your own religious connection, either to your faith or to your Creator? Or did it distance you from that? And my hope is that by opening up different ways of looking at things, we may have removed some roadblocks for many people towards faith in general, towards their own faith, perhaps to their own religious upbringing, that have held them back from a meaningful connection to a God who loves them, to a community that is yearning for their participation and their embrace, and to a life that can be more filled with meaning, with the comfort in knowing that we don't have to have the answer to every question, but we can be very pious and make life sacred by asking the questions about what is my purpose here in this life and my place. If we've done any of that, if we raise those questions in the minds of others, we've done our job.
Our guests today on Good Faith Reads have been Rabbi Mark Schiftan and Dr. Frank Boehm, authors of A Rabbi and a Doctor Walk into a Bar, a shared dialogue on faith and belief. That book, along with many other titles, is available at goodfaithmedia.org/shop.